Yo, this is Sensei is cleaning the top of the wall. From June 15th to 17th, South Korea also participated in the G7 summit held in Canada. We have been invited to attend the G7 summit, but does that mean South Korea can join the G7 as a member? Today, I will explain this part in detail. Please stay tuned. Before we begin, if you press the subscribe button, I will deliver special content to you. Trust me, and let's grow together. First, before we start, let's clearly understand what the G7 is. The G7 is a summit of the 7 major countries. Think of it as a gathering of VIPs in international politics, where the 7 most influential advanced countries in the world come together to discuss various international issues like politics, economy, and security. That way, it'll be easier to understand. The United States, United Kingdom, France, Germany, Japan, Italy, and Canada are the countries that lead the world. Notably, all of these Western countries are advanced nations that share a system of liberal democracy and a market economy. That's why the G7 is often called the summit of the 7 Western countries. So why was the G7 created initially? The G7 was formed in the 1970s during a period of surging prices and economic recession caused by the oil shock. As the global economy seemed to be on the verge of collapse, the leading industrialized countries felt a strong need to overcome the crisis together. Except for Russia's involvement and withdrawal, this has continued largely unchanged for nearly 50 years. Now, a situation has emerged where Korea can participate too. Recently, some G7 members, particularly the United States, have called for changes within the group. This is due to China's rapid rise. When the G7 was formed in 1975, the member countries made up over 60% of global gross domestic product. As of 2023, their share has fallen to 29.3%. That statistic from 2 years ago is likely even lower now. On the other hand, China accounted for only about 3% of the world's gross domestic product in the 1970s, but now China makes up 20%. Looking at China's economic growth trend, it's very likely that it will surpass 20%. China's presence has reached a level that rivals the G7. The G7 upholds liberal democracy and market economy values, but China's challenge to these standards threatens the group. The United States is preparing to respond to this new Cold War scenario by forming strategic alliances. That's why the G7 is trying to strengthen and expand into a broader anti-China coalition. Since 2020, there has been active discussion about expanding the G7 with the United States at its center. In 2021, the United Kingdom proposed creating a D10 by adding South Korea, Australia, and India. In summary, the global community is increasingly forming an anti-China diplomatic bloc to keep China's power in check. South Korea meets the requirements to join the G7, which include being a developed country with a strong economy and shared values with current members. The G7 countries share values like human rights and liberal democracy and are considered the leading economic powers among developed nations. Of course, the G7 is not a gathering of all powerful or economic superpowers. It was a gathering of powerful or economic superpowers, so China and India would have had to participate as well. But that's not the case. The G7 is viewed as a group of reliable allies, led by the United States, who can support the world order as economic powers. Their per capita gross domestic product exceeds Japan's, so they can be included based on economic power. It is also a country with robust industrial competitiveness and substantial cultural influence. South Korea's G7 membership required unanimous approval from all current members. Previously, Japan opposed South Korea's participation, but under Prime Minister Kishida's leadership, the likelihood of joining has increased. Prime Minister Ishiba is also known to be pro-Korean. He discusses establishing an Asia Fund with South Korea and remains open to collaboration with the country. The issue lies with European nations like Germany, France, and Italy, which are indicating a growing detachment from the G7 expansion. France has also disapproved of using the G7 to contain China. France has recently been very critical of South Korea's entry into the European market. They persist in attempting to limit South Korean exports. It was also revealed that French intelligence agencies interfered and sabotaged South Korea's attempt to export nuclear power plants to Czechia. France is actively opposing South Korea's inclusion in the G7, and this opposition is deliberate. I discussed this in a video recently. France has been pressuring South Korea heavily, sometimes even overstepping boundaries. While South Korea's inclusion in the G7 is not yet confirmed, the United States is actively advocating for the group's expansion. With the global power balance shifting from Europe to Asia, this situation may prove advantageous for South Korea. So if South Korea joins the G7, what kind of changes do you think will happen? South Korea's entry into the G7 will require a shift from its Northeast Asia-focused diplomacy. Now, South Korea must conduct diplomacy with the world as its counterpart. Joining the G7 is more than just attending an international meeting. This signifies that South Korea will soon be part of a global decision-making group that shapes the world's destiny, which is far more influential than the G20. The G20 is an economic platform where major economies from every continent, each with unique characteristics, convene. The G7 is a global leadership body that discusses and decides on all worldwide issues, including politics, security, economy, and diplomacy. The G7 is not just a player on the international stage, but also serves as a judge and regulator. If Korea joins the G7, our diplomacy can no longer be confined to the regional frame of Northeast Asia. We must develop and execute global diplomatic strategies that encompass Southeast Asia, Africa, Europe, and Latin America. Joining the G7 will make Korea a leading nation, but it also means significantly increased responsibilities. Historically, Korea maintained neutrality on issues like the Ukraine war, Iran's nuclear program, Middle East tensions, and Taiwan Strait risks. The United States did put some pressure on us, but even so, we were able to maintain a certain level of neutrality. Since joining the G7 as a leading country, we are now expected to make bolder statements and take more proactive actions. The Lee Jae-myung administration faces challenging diplomatic relations with China, causing concerns about further strains. The G7 is a diplomatic system focused on containing China. Korea-China relations are inevitably deteriorating, and we are strategically moving further away from China. This decline seems almost unavoidable. Of course, since the majority of Koreans currently have a negative view of China, there may be only a few people who would oppose taking a strong stance against China. Due to past economic retaliation from China during Terminal High Altitude Area defense deployment, there are worries that China may impose sanctions if Korea fully engages in the G7's anti-China efforts. One thing is clear, the South Korea-United States alliance will only strengthen. The United States is the G7's core, and Korea is expected to be a key pillar of containment policy in the Asia-Pacific. This also means the strategic role of United States Forces Korea will expand significantly, likely leading to agreements on bolstering deterrence against North Korea and China. This presents a new diplomatic challenge for Korea, putting the current Lee Jae-myung administration's foreign policy to a difficult test. Since taking office, the Lee Jae-myung administration has pursued pragmatic, balanced diplomacy centered on national interests rather than ideology. This means maintaining an alliance with the United States while also trying to minimize strategic tensions with China. Joining the G7 could be a turning point that forces abandoning this balanced approach. In the past, was it possible for Korea to take a neutral stance on certain issues or maintain an ambiguous position while accommodating both sides? If Korea becomes a full G7 member, it must participate in joint statements, sanctions, and criticism. When a G7 statement on China is released, South Korea will face sensitive diplomatic dilemmas head-on. Korea faces potential friction with the G7 if it doesn't sign the statement, but signing it risks backlash from China. This issue goes beyond expressing an opinion. It's tied to the credibility of Korean diplomacy, putting significant pressure on Korea. This could also boost Korea's diplomatic status. In brief, Korea must develop a diplomatic strategy that transcends bilateral relations and guides the world. Additionally, a single international speech or decision can significantly impact domestic politics, so caution is necessary. What truly matters in these situations is the shift in our perception. It seems we might finally have a voice on the global stage. Now, the Republic of Korea is no longer a small country. In terms of economic power, military strength, technological capability, and cultural influence, we have become a leading nation. The time has come for us to take on the responsibility of diplomacy that matches our status. Our entry into the G7 is not simply about raising our name, but it means that we are now shaping and leading international norms together with the rest of the world. On one hand, this may feel like a heavy burden, but at the same time, it is also an opportunity to show our national pride and status to the world. For a moment, I questioned if we were out of our depth. The G7 brings together the world's most powerful nations. The moment South Korea joins that group, we can no longer maintain a neutral foreign policy like before. Amidst all this, a situation may arise where we must directly confront China. Can South Korea truly manage such matters? I'm interested in your perspective on this. Please leave your thoughts in the comments as well. I'll wrap up the video here. Thank you.